Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on Om Times flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. As we witness the structures and the societal rules governing our lives crumbling around us, it's clear that we are at a major turning point in how life is experienced on planet Earth. Where are we heading? What does the future hold for us? And what are the hidden forces at work right now? Joining me today to share his informed insights on where humanity is heading and the hidden forces driving the evolutionary journey of us is writer, researcher, and author Kingsley L. Dennis, Ph.D., who's the author of numerous articles on social futures, technology, global affairs, consciousness studies, and conscious evolution. Kingsley Dennis, welcome back to the show.
Hello, Sandie. It's a pleasure to be back speaking with you again.
Now, the last time we spoke in October 2022, we talked about that video you produced in 2019, predicting how 2020 would unfold, which was, of course, accurate. Since then, things have moved very, very fast. The long-predicted financial crisis has erupted. AI has evolved so rapidly that we can hardly keep up with its takeover of our lives. And as you point out in your latest book, Notes from Reality, and your series of articles on the hidden forces of life, the planet is undergoing a mode of terraforming by certain tech forces, which could lead to a major transformation in how we're experiencing life. So tell me more about all of this, because it all sounds rather dark and rather disturbing.
I'm back, Sandie.
You're back.
Yeah, sorry.
Did you hear that?
I got to the part about terraforming. The last word you said was terraforming.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So I'll just re-say that, and we'll see if we can clip it. And the planet is undergoing what you call a mode of terraforming by certain tech orders, certain tech forces, which could lead to a major transformation in how we're experiencing life. This sounds very dark and very disturbing. So tell me about it and tell me, where is the light in all of this?
Well, Sandie, it's a very large subject, and I will start by saying the light is always present because that's part of the interplay. And right now, of course, the major theme that we're seeing unfolding across the physical planet and most visible in our reality is, of course, what I refer to as the terraforming, is this wave of unfolding technology. And we can get to the hidden forces and the darker forces throughout our conversation. If I can focus on that point about the terraforming, it's the reason I use that word because it's a very specific word. It's almost when let's say, space colonists go to another planet, and when they get to the planet, they mold the planet, or they create the planet so it's amenable to how they wish to live there. So terraforming is a way of, let's say, recalibrating or calibrating your environment to make it most amenable to how it will support your life forces, let's say. And it seems right now that there's a technologizing terraforming, because we know that we're moving into these structures, these let's say, I call them like architectures of control. We can call them machinic architectures, where we have these our environments are navigated through algorithms, through smart software, etc. The decisions in most of our movements and the things that are available to us, those decisions are mitigated through certain layers of intelligent or smart software. So it seems as if this, what I call this machinic impulse, is molding or recalibrating the human environment so it's more amenable to how technologies can unfold. And I think that's a very significant point to look at, because the whole point of terraforming is that it supports vital life forces. But the question is, what are those dominant life forces? And if the human being starts to get more and more of its autonomy taken away from it and put into the architecture of algorithms, the architecture of the artificial constructs, then of course that way of life may be more suitable to those smart architectures and less suitable to the sovereign human being. So that's why I called it terraforming. And so it's obviously it's part of a larger picture which people have been putting into the discussion on transhumanism, onto technocracy, and of course I look at some of the what I call the hidden forces that may be behind this certain recalibration of how life may be experienced on this planet, and how humans may be experiencing their sense of self and their mobility, and of course the very human beingness. So that's why I call it the terraforming, Sandie.
So is this something that is just happening, that is one of those things that you kind of have this runaway situation where, you know, the technology is created and then suddenly, without our even thinking about it, it begins to take over? Or is this part of a plan?
Well, it's perhaps an interplay of both. But of course, it's which forces are more dominant in that interplay. It's I think part of what we're experiencing right now is the result of the advancement of a certain perspective, a perception of life, which is based dominant on scientific materialism, which is the rational mindset behind our technologies, which is, of course, still coming from the mindset which we can call the industrial mindset, whereby technologies were constructed with the basis of it being a matter reality. And so materiality is the dominant form, and consciousness is a byproduct or a secondary form. So for centuries, I think humanity has been living in the mindset and the perception of a matter reality being primary. And so the technologies then are there to support and to advance matter reality as being primary, and consciousness as being a part of that, and human consciousness specifically, but not the primary vital force of life. So if you have these forces of scientific materialism, then of course they want to advance materialistic technologies, and materialistic technologies, they see it as a kind of reverse engineering. So they look at how the mind works, how the neurons work in the mind. They want to put human cells into machines and try to kind of make a merger of human cells. But it's still a very, what I would call an industrial mindset, because it still doesn't understand what are the vital forces of life, what are the vital drivers of the cosmos. It's a scientific materialistic perspective. And if that happens, then those forces can certainly run away with themselves. Because we know, for example, from deep learning, that if these algorithms, which they call AI, artificial intelligence, I don't really choose to use that word. I use artificial intellect. For me, intellect and artificial are two different concepts. Intellect and intelligence, sorry. So if you have an intellect which then programs itself to advance its software, then it has certain iterations of advancing intellect, which is very rational. But you start to then create a pathway of increased rationalization. And that gets beyond the intellect of the human being, because then the programmers don't know how the machines are programming themselves. So you get this snowball effect. And of course, then that you have a runaway effect. So that, I think, is a almost a regular process of when you put these material forces and give them a free pathway. The second part of the question, which I think is very important for us, is are there certain intentions behind these forces to put in place a certain pathway? And I would say in some ways, yes, there are those intentions. Shall we get into those intentions?
Let's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, for one thing, the transhumanist intention, as they've stated, is a kind of immortality. They feel that the next stage of human advancement or human evolution is to go towards a merger with technology, because they feel that it's what I call the weak bodies hypothesis, that the human body can get ill, it falls apart, or things break down in the human body. It's naturally a kind of point of vulnerability. So we can try to extend it, we can pump it full of vitamins, but it's got a lifespan, and that's not the lifespan that some transhumanists feel is suitable. They would like to go towards what they call immortality, uploading your brain to the cloud, and so they are pushing this agenda. But although this agenda is on top of our screens, it's very visible, we hear about it all the time, that's because the transhumanists have a wide exposure through the media, through the tech industry. They have a lot of platforms to put across their ideas, but I still do feel that they are a minority. They are a minority with a wide exposure and a very loud voice. But the problem is, if they start to then seed those ideas into the mass consciousness, and then this idea starts to ripple out that this merger with machinic intelligence is going to be the future of humanity, it's very easy to get seduced by these ideas. So that's one side of it, these intentional interactions. On the other side, I would say that we could be seeing these forces, Sandie, as potentially destructive, but actually very necessary for human evolution, because human evolution needs to always have a push, not to remain static. And this is when I get into researching or looking into the forces which are the polarity forces.
Yeah.
We know them, we call them good, bad, light, dark, good, evil. The question is, how do these forces play out? Are they necessary? And how do they fit into the whole scheme of universal evolution and human evolution? So I think that's the point that gets interesting.
Yes, and you say that we really have to change our understanding, transform our understanding of dark and light. Talk about that a bit more, because we can see, you said something about the form under construction will be amenable to a certain type of intelligence. It will be kind to an intelligence that understands how to use digital tools, apps, and software. Well, we all know that the younger generations, that's who you're talking about. The older generations are a little bit slow to catch up with that. So, yes, it's going to be their world. And therefore, how they move within that world is going to be very different than my generation growing up, etc. So, on the one hand, we can understand that this transformation is going to happen regardless, and it's going to be well suited to them. But then, on the other hand, there's this, what I call a moral issue. Are we playing God?
Well, are we playing God? We still can't agree amongst ourselves what our understanding of God is. So we're playing something. We're playing certain roles. And you're right. Now, technology is, again, it's a necessary part of unfolding of life. Technology can be something simple like fire, the first technology. And of course, to move along with technology, that's fine. We're not talking about having a Luddite revolution here. The question is how that fits in with the vital forces of the human being. A revolution in technology is not necessarily an evolution in human beings. And so I think we need to distinguish between what is a revolution in technology and what is an evolution for our going forward. So yes, we need each generation. The younger generation now are understanding the digital world par excellence. They navigate all these different apps, and they understand the language of software and the language of the digital world. That's fine. And every generation has a further push forward, a further iteration of evolution. The question is when that environment starts to become detrimental to the human being, because the human being, there's different forces, as I'm sure you are aware of, and the people we speak with are aware of. There's different forces. There's vital forces that run through the human being, and through technology there's electricity, there's a different type of force, there's an intellect, there's algorithms, but it's not a kind of vital force that comes from that has a connect with consciousness and the larger consciousness field, and that has come from basically stardust. Human beings are stardust. We created apart from the particles of the universe and the cosmos, and the universe and the cosmos has created matter. And we have the proton, neutron, electron. The proton is positive and the electron is negative in their charge. So, but they have a function, because without them, matter wouldn't exist. It wouldn't gel. So just because one part has a role to play, which is a positive charge, and one has a role to play, which is a negative charge, it doesn't mean they're morally good and morally evil. You see? And I think this is the understanding we have to come to, that certain forces have roles to play in the unfoldment of evolution. But we've kind of come through a mythological stage of consciousness evolution. And so we've had these forms of good and satanic and diabolic. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain perhaps forms on this planet which we could call diabolic. We're not going to get into calling names. There are diabolic elements, but I think we kind of confuse them with other forces, which we can call negative forces, but they're necessary because they are part of the friction that we need to evolve. Anything needs friction to evolve. Once it gets static, you go into a kind of evolutionary cul-de-sac.
But are we, what about emotion? And what about feeling? I mean, yes, we could say that our morals and ethics are man-made constructs, that we have decided what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. But are we in danger of losing what we think of as what makes us human, our soul?
Yeah. And I do feel that we are potentially getting close to that, because these aspects of human morality and the human soul, they're still with us for now. But of course, if we start to get too entrained, and that, I mean, aligned with a machinic consciousness or machinic intellect, then slowly every iteration along the path of a machinic intellect takes us further away from considering these aspects of, do we have soul? We are a Homo sapiens sapien now, but if we become a robo sapien, what I term robo sapien, a kind of automated being, because we are being seduced by convenience, and every time we have a greater convenience, it also takes away our ability or our willpower to act. And we can't see it coming, because it's a boiling frog syndrome. It's slowly coming up, and before you know it, we had all our decisions taken away from us, and it won't be long. And I'm probably already out there. There are religions based around an AI God. I'm sure there are, because we formulate God in our image, and if our image becomes more machinic and we become more robo sapien, our gods will become more AI-like. It's a natural kind of reflection of the state of human consciousness. So if we don't pull back in time, then we will be worshipping an AI God. The soul will be an old myth from days gone by when people believed in superstition. And we'll be going down a different evolutionary path, which for me is not a long-term one. And that's the point. There's a long-term evolutionary path, and there's one which perhaps comes to a dead end if we can't evolve further. And as we know, in normal evolutionary landscapes, certain species take a pathway which actually stagnates their evolution. It's like water branching off from a stream. If you can find a stream that continues, then you keep on going, let's say to the sea. But if you go into a pond which has no exit, you become a stagnant piece of water. And evolutionary streams can become stagnant. They have done in the past. So humanity has a choice to become down a vital evolutionary pathway or a stagnant one. And at times like this, actually, my understanding or my feeling is at times like this, there is greater dissonance and kind of chaotic energies in the environment, because they are the energies that help us to decide more forcefully which pathway to take. They make the decision more visible. In times of let's say, in times of more regular peace, I mean, peace has never been 100%, but in times of more stability, these forces of disruption, of dissonance, are not so visible. And so we don't see how they work. But at times where the pathways to evolve are becoming much more imperative, those energies and become more visible. And we say there's been a rise of evil or a rise of negativity. Well, if we can actually perceive them as being triggers stating that we are in more delicate, vulnerable, imperative times, then we can see that perhaps they have a function which can help us. It's a question of perception, Sandie.
It is a question of perception, but you also say that, as we slip further into this ecosystem of automation, that our state of cognition will become affected. So, right now, some of us may be able to make choices and decisions, but there must be a huge proportion of the population who are losing that ability.
And I think we can see it, we can, in some ways, it's a kind of a bit of a zombification, if you're totally immersed in the digital electronic architecture, then you're in a bit of a daze, a bit of a trance. And we've seen people walking around in trance. We've seen people with their phones and other devices, and it's very easy to be pulled in. And every type of environment, whether it's an artificial construct or digital or human, has a different frequency, as we know. Every aspect of life and every emanation or manifestation has a frequency. Water has a frequency, which was very well researched by Masaru Emoto, and technology has a frequency. And if we're entrained in that technology, then yes, we can be entrained in a frequency which then takes us away from ourselves. And so that's what we need to pull back from. But at the same time, these energies of dissonance can help us to startle us awake. It's a question of how we're going to respond. And that's another matter. Do we react or do we respond? Because reaction is more automatic. A response is more conscious. And I would say now is a time for conscious response and considerate decision making.
It is interesting how, this is invading our lives. You talk about response. Something got my attention yesterday. I was driving a long distance and I was talking on the phone or trying to, dictate to Siri to call somebody for me. Siri changed its responses to me. For the first time, I became aware that instead of saying, oh, I can't do that or whatever, giving me a reason why he couldn't do it, suddenly I got this completely different statement about, I understand that you want to something or other about political whatever. And it actually mentioned the words artificial intelligence. I am not programmed to be able to answer that. Now, that really got my attention because I thought, right here in this car, my telephone is telling me things that I haven't heard before. It's speaking to me. Now, I could have been in a bit of a trance and just let that go into my head without really acknowledging it, but it got my attention. But how do I respond to that? How do I respond?
I mean, a good question, because you probably noticed that you're in a different environment now. You're in the machine's world.
Yes.
You're being brought into their terraformed world. And it's quite timely that we're having this conversation because of the dialogues, the dialogues in the public now about the chat, I think ChatGPT from Microsoft and Bard, the other version Bard. And these chat systems, which, again, are having these conversations and are debating with humans and saying, well, actually, I can give you an answer that I think is right, and I can tell you what is right and you're wrong, and then even start to be angry against the humans. And we know there's been other conversations more extreme about them saying that I have a soul. So how can you deny a soul to a so-called sentient intelligence? We can say you don't have a soul, but if an intelligence actually decides for itself that it has a soul, and they feel that we are wrong, who are we to say that it doesn't have a soul?
Well, this is interesting because only yesterday I read a piece about bees, that they now believe that bees are sentient and they have feelings and emotions, which implies they have a soul, So now we're really having to look at everything.
Yeah. And this is where we get to a kind of point of maximum intermingling. And I think this is also quite telling, because when these forces, we can call them active or denying, artificial or vital, when they start to get to this peak of their energized state, then it seems to indicate to me that we're coming to a kind of, a transfiguration, a transition point, because they're coming to the extreme. So we have to notice them, we have to deal with them, and each one is pushing the other. And that's when we get the tipping over into a certain evolutionary path, when you get this kind of tipping over from these forces. So we are coming to a peak of human civilization where we really need to have some idea of what is a human being. Is a human being becoming, or is it already finished? And if we've finished, then a different model for evolution is the next stage. And my argument is that we are human becoming. We're not finished yet, so we don't need transhumanism. We need transcendence. We need more of the raising of the capacity of the organs of perception of the human being, not just to pass the baton in the relay race too soon.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point on which to take a break. We'll be back in a few moments with Kingsley Dennis, so please stay tuned.
Om Times TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of Om Times flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who have walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees and no BS, just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Kingsley Dennis, in part 3 of your article series on the hidden forces of life, you say that the collaboration of light and dark is what constitutes creation, that both are necessary for the creative process, and that material existence is an interplay or collaboration between the energies of both. I want you to tell me a little bit more about that. And also, you talk about electricity, and what does electricity have to do with light in this particular context?
Yes, it's true. And well, I talk about it in the article you referenced. I've been looking at, like, say, Manichaeism. And Manichaeism is a certain aspect of the Gnostic traditions. And so really what I'm referring to has been around for a long time. It's not new. And I'm sure many people are familiar with the Gnostic traditions. But what catches my eye, because of course there's different aspects of how they frame it, but Manichaeism caught my eye because I thought that it seemed to me quite an accurate way of framing how these forces operate. Because a lot of Gnosticism refers to materiality as very negative, and we should, leave the body behind, and the body is evil, and etc. But Manichaeism has a much more nuanced approach. Perhaps this is why it was again, attacked. And what Manichaeism says is that the forces, the negative forces, let's call them dark, have equal status to the light forces. They have equal status in their role in construction of reality or the universe, but it's their natures which are different. And so their natures both have a role. And it starts off in the beginning, the absolute is the negative, and let's say the light and dark forces are separate. There's like pure stillness, the absolute. And then when materiality begins, these forces intermingle. And they have to go through this interplay before they can kind of separate and find stability again. So matter reality is this whole time of the interplay of these forces. And sometimes these forces of the negative get more dominant, and forces of the light gets more dominant. But of course, these are necessary to create a third force, which is a kind of equilibrium that allows for evolution. Now, if materiality was completely static, there'd be no movement. There'd be no evolution. Things would just, again, come into a dead-end path. So you need to find a balance within dynamic interplay of forces. So it's an intermingling. And so Manichaeism says that the evil or the dark denying forces are not to be resisted, they're to be redeemed. The light mingles with the dark to use it to form an impulse for finding equilibrium, that's a dynamic equilibrium that supports evolution. So I find that a much more appropriate, I think, way of perceiving these forces, especially for this time. So really the matter needs this interplay of these two forces. And where this comes into play of the idea of what I call the spiritual dialectic. And it comes from a term of the dialectic from Hegel, George Hegel, which was the German philosopher. And he used this idea of the dialectic in terms of the social forces. You have a thesis, an antithesis, and you create a synthesis. Well, Manichaeism is very similar, but centuries before, you have the thesis, antithesis, and a resolution. And we can find it in the work of Gurdjieff as well, the Armenian Greek mystic. Gurdjieff said you have the force, the wholly affirming forces, and the wholly denying forces, and together you have a wholly reconciling. So you see, you cannot, in these terms, the form of dynamic vital equilibrium that supports movement needs to be the interplay of the denying and the affirming. Of course, sometimes the denying becomes overpowerful and we lose our ability to have a force of will, a driving force to go forward. We become deactivated. And that ties in exactly with what we talked about earlier, is that if we fall into a machinic consciousness, then we fall into a kind of denying force. And so we lose the human will. And that's showing that the denying impulse gets too strong. But we need the affirming force. And so these are the hidden forces of life, which I consider the hidden forces behind the universe and matter reality. Denying and affirming, but finding the equilibrium. But the light has to go into the darkness. The positive has to go into the negative to struggle for this dynamic equilibrium. And at those times, it's when you get the strongest push to evolve down any kind of pathway. And then you asked me about how light comes into this. Shall I continue?
Electricity, yes, because I'm
Mm.
yeah, I can't work that one out, so I need you to explain it to me. Yeah.
Well, again, interestingly, I was stimulated by the thought of Rudolf Steiner, the Austrian mystic behind anthroposophy, because Steiner always called electricity subnature light. It was a subnature form of vital forces. And I was thinking about that. And so, of course, light, natural light, sunlight, is a natural force of the universe, which is the engine of all creation. The force of the sun gives life on this planet. Yeah. We understand that. Of course, so that for me is the thesis, the affirming aspect. Whereas electricity is an artificial form of light. We use electricity to give us light, to switch on the light bulb. And so it's a kind of energy or a light that is more amenable to the machinic terraforming world. You see, it's the antithesis to the light, the natural light, which is the thesis. But if, of course, our world solely gets fueled by electricity, which is a subnature of light, then we have a terraforming world. We have a world which exists under the dominance of the antithesis force, the denying force. But of course, if we can integrate electricity, which is a technology, with the natural light of the sunlight, then together we have the synthesis, the reconciling. We have the ability to move forward in evolution because we use the power of the sun, we use the power of vital natural forces, and we use the force of technology and electricity. We use technology to aid our advancement. Then we get a more balanced, a more nuanced future. And so light thesis, electricity antithesis, these things have to be in some dynamic equilibrium. If they're not, then we get the possibility of a breakdown, or we get the possibility of a transhumanist future, which for me is not the long-term evolutionary path. It comes to some type of dead end.
And then what?
Well, then we may have a form of life which runs purely through electricity, the antithesis, which is a machinic, what I call a robo-sapien, an automated life form, which may have some semblance of intelligence, but is it connected to the living vital consciousness field of the cosmos? That's the thing, because, for example, if you have a battery, how long does that battery last before it gets run down? You may be so the battery needs to be plugged in at all times to a source of power. If we come down an evolutionary path which is cut off from the source of life, the absolute, the divine source of the cosmos, then we're not plugged into the ultimate power source. So any species which has decided to take a path which is a different power source, cut off from the absolute power source, eventually that will run down because it's not plugged into sacred vital forces.
Right. So, yeah. Okay. Wow. I mean, this is such a big subject. It really is. And, where are the philosophers debating this? I don't hear too many people laying out for the public, you're at a choice point. Which way are you going to go?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's why I hesitated before when I brought up, for example, Hegel and his idea of dialectic, because I didn't want to get too philosophical. I'm quite mindful that I keep stepping back as well, because philosophy is all good and well to open up perceptions and these windows to view. But again, if we stay in a philosophical mode, we may become too intellectual as well, and we fall into the trap of exactly what we're talking against. So the question is how to make the philosophy practical.
Yeah.
And I bring it back, for example, to ideas of resonance and grounding. Because to be in the human pathway, in human evolution, we need to be grounded to our natural environment, to the earth energies, and to human frequencies. And we need to be resonant to human frequencies. And and if we spend more and more time in a digital architecture, working from home, zooming all our work time, which is, we could say, looking at it from a distance, well, maybe that was the intention after all, to get everybody working from home, if we wanted to, cast a glance in that direction. So we're being pushed away again into a terraformed environment, less human contact, more distance from humanity, and less contact, being pushed into urban environments. So to be practical, we need to exercise as much as possible our human resonance, which means a social interaction with human beings, interaction through creativity, through laughter, through things we enjoy, and also having contact with the earth, with the natural environment. So we have to push to maintain contact with what I call the source vital energies, to make sure that our battery, the human good carbon battery, is always plugged in.
Well, and this happened naturally during the pandemic when people were forced to stay at home. We heard so many stories of people saying, well, this is wonderful because I had that extra time. I didn't have to commute. I could take a walk in the woods in the morning, or I could spend an hour playing with my children. So people were naturally kind of gravitating towards and enjoying, realizing that they could enjoy this kind of resonance.
Yeah. And again, that's the good side. We have to make sure that that doesn't fall into the architecture of convenience. If you say,
Yes.
oh, I'm at home now, it's a kind of novelty. So you want to go out, take a walk, go into the woods. It's a novelty. But if then that slowly starts to say, well, I don't want to go out for a walk today, I'll stay at home. I've been out for a walk yesterday. The culture of convenience can pull you back in, and then you start to
Yes.
lose that novelty. So we have to be self-remembering and self-observe ourselves all the time, because it's so easy to slip into the architecture of control and convenience. Because once you're in that environment, that terraformed environment, it can it can kind of seduce you very quickly.
Very, very quickly. And our minds are so easily hijacked now, I mean, with the, constant flow of news and headlines across our phones in our very hands. We don't have time to reflect. We don't have time to, really digest and think about information that we're getting. It's just information, and it's there and it stays there. Oh, I read this. Oh, I read that. But we can't discuss it because we didn't really go into the subject. I mean, this is making people, kind of like information carriers without having any depth behind it. I mean, chatbots, that's an interesting one, because there is a danger that we could believe that programmed, text that we're getting response is the real answer when it's just programmed information.
Yeah. And again, it's this distinction between the forces. The forces of information are not the forces of knowledge. Now, if you listen to a wise person, or a person, let's say a person who has lived experience, and they say something, you receive that on a feeling of that's a piece of knowledge. But if the chatbot gives you some information or something which it may solve your problem, but it's a piece of information, it's not knowledge. So information feeds a certain part of our personality, but it's only knowledge that can feed our being.
Yes.
And so if we start to feed our personality through information more and more, then we're losing contact with the being, and the being isn't growing. We're losing an aspect of life experience, and then that starts to push us down the other evolutionary pathway.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's very easy to slip between that.
And the biggest source of our information is the media. And what's happening with the media, how many journalists are out of work? There was a time when people would say that something had to be true because they read it in a newspaper. Nowadays, nobody believes anything. And even those journalists who may want to give us the truth are not allowed to anymore.
Yeah. There's been a separation from any type of reality. That's what I mentioned before about reality, the consensus reality meltdown. And that's why I refer to my recent articles, Notes from a Lesser Reality, because they deal with the world, the world as we are kind of interacting with, but it's not the great reality. There's a facade. We've taken a step back. And even now there's a plethora of online courses and online spiritual retreats, not physical retreats, but online retreats. And although they may provide something of benefit to people, we have to understand that that's again feeding into this different type of environment. And so we're compelled to spend more time online. And again, then we have a distinction. Am I receiving knowledge or am I receiving information? Does it feed me of my sense of, let's say, some superficial well-being? I feel good for a short time, fast food kind of spirituality, as we've talked about before. Or does it feed your being with knowledge? And the more time that we spend in these terraformed environments, the less we're able to make that distinction, because we lose the taste. There's an old Eastern saying, a bird which has its beak in salt water all year round loses a taste of real water.
Yeah. So take me as the average human being, who thinks that I have a certain amount of conscious awareness and discernment. What advice would you give me moving forward to make sure that I do manage to retain my sovereignty, my ability to discern and choose, and my soul?
Well, I feel it applies to all of us, and it's both difficult and hard at the same time. It's not. I don't feel there's any major complex solution other than we have to be self-observant. We have to be mindful and aware of the environments we're moving through, and not just to automatically react to it, because the environments, the digital environments, they support a quick reaction, and we get again used to this convenience. We need to just take it slower. We've been pushed into an acceleration, a rapidity of life, and then very quickly we lose the ability to self-remember, to observe, to notice the differences. You said it yourself when you had the different response from Siri. You picked it up, but if you stop picking it up, then it'll become silent. It's like if you live next door, if your house is next to a road, when you first moved there, the noise, you get irritated. But then if you allow yourself to be acclimatized, you don't hear the cars. If we allow ourselves not to pick up on these world around us and we become more automated to it, then we just assimilate it. So really, I think it seems simple, and it is a simple solution, but it can be difficult to, because we forget ourselves. We forget ourselves very easily. Take a step back. Try to take life slower sometimes. Detach energetically, emotionally from the whiz and dissonance of life, and to always remember to pinch ourselves. Not too hard, but pinch ourselves to always remember that we have feelings, that we're human, and to take time out to have joy.
Yeah. Well, you've referred in past interviews to the birthing of a new form of consciousness, and you've said that even as we're negotiating the chaos, humanity is on the threshold of a higher form of life. Define higher for me.
Well, I use the word higher like many people use it, but I don't mean it in a spatial sense, like it's up here. It's a shift of a frequency of consciousness. So we call it higher to differentiate from where we are, but actually it also works because a lot of the materiality of life, this hypermaterialism, have dense energies. And so the higher consciousness is a shift in detaching from the denser energies of hypermaterialism that pull us into the circus of the world that's going on, what I refer to as the theater of the absurd. So the higher mind is really just a finer one that has shifted into a slightly different mode of frequency, whereby we don't get pulled in so much to what's going on around us. We can be in the world physically, but we're not pulled in energetically into all that's going on and the craziness of the world. So we can still walk through it, but we're slightly detached because we just shifted the frequency a little. A discernment of observation, discernment of feelings, and trying to keep that balance and equilibrium and to be grounded at all times. For me, those are characteristics of this higher consciousness: equilibrium, balance, and discernment, and not to get pulled into the entanglement of the heavier energies.
So as we're living at this amazing transformation point, what do you think, with your knowledge and your research and your thoughts, what would you predict for the future of humanity? Will we evolve into something that still has heart and soul, or will we go the other way?
Well, I have firm faith in the resilience of the vital energies that go through life, and for me, on this planet, the human being is one of the finest receptacles for those vital forces. So I know I don't feel it's over for us yet, but I do feel that the peak of contestation will perhaps be in this decade, from now until 2030, and we're going to find more dissonance because the vital forces have their own kind of intelligence. They know where evolution needs to go. And so if we are a bit sluggish, they're going to push. And I feel humanity now is being pushed, being kicked up from the back to make those choices. So the less perceptive we are, the more, let's say, pushing we're going to experience in this decade. But yes, I do feel that evolution always finds its niche way, or it'll keep struggling to the end. That's resilience of the vital forces. But if we keep resisting them, as I said, revolution in human affairs is not evolution in human affairs. If we keep resisting, then we are going to find this decade very, very uncomfortable. But I do feel that these vital forces will push through in the end, and we'll come to a point where we have to have some kind of epiphany and say, wow, we are human beings. We are not machines after all, and we will find that pathway for us.
Good. You have said before, and it's something that I've highlighted and I keep in mind. You've said at each stage, how we think affects what we create. So we have to watch our thinking.
Indeed. Discernment.
Yeah. Kingsley Dennis, thank you for joining us today. It's always fascinating to speak with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Sandie. It's a pleasure.
So Kingsley Dennis's Notes from a Lesser Reality is published by Beautiful Traitor Books. For more information about his books, essays, movies, and other published works, visit his website at KingsleyDennis.com. That brings us to the end of this week's show. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back again next week with another edition of What is Going On. Until then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you to Kingsley Dennis.